on peacekeeping early warning and response tracking systems and the protection of civilians in Mali. This panel was organized by the United Nations Operation and Crisis Center and the Center for Civilians in Conflict, of course, with engagement from the UN peacekeeping mission in Mali. The panel will cover a range of issues, from the critical importance of effective early warning and rapid response in UN peacekeeping, to the new early warning rapid response system developed by the UN peacekeeping mission in Mali, and the innovative app that was developed to help disseminate early warning across stakeholders in the peacekeeping mission, catalyze and track actions taken, and analyze responses. My name is Allison Giffen. I'm the director of the Peacekeeping Program at the Center for Civilians in Conflict, known as CIVIC, and will be facilitating today's discussion. I'm going to kick off the panel with some brief background on our speakers and what they will be focusing on today. We've planned for each panelist to speak for about 7 minutes, and we hope that their remarks will spark a number of comments and questions, which we encourage you to submit questions and comments into the chat box on the right side of your screen. Lauren Spink will be starting the panel. She is CIVIC Senior Global Research. She currently provides research to support across CIVIC, but previously served as CIVIC Senior Peacekeeping Researcher, leading the organization's work in DRC and South Sudan. Lauren is going to start by providing an overview of the unique role that UN peacekeeping operations can play in early warning and rapid response, as well as some of the challenges that peacekeeping operations face when trying to prevent and respond to violence against civilians. Sean Smith is CIVIC's peacekeeping researcher in Mali. He's based in Bamako. His research helps shape CIVIC's advocacy priorities and policy recommendations regarding the UN peacekeeping mission in Mali, known as MINUSMA, and the mission's protection of civilians' responsibilities. Sean is going to provide brief background on the conflict and protection crisis in Mali and highlight findings from a recent study that he concluded on MINUSMA's new early warning and rapid response system. Then Jonathan Lorillard, who is currently the chief of the Mopti Joint Operations Center in MINUSMA, is going to discuss why the application was developed in MINUSMA, the problems it was trying to solve, and he was really instrumental in the operationalization of this app and the new standard operating procedure that MINUSMA developed. We will close the panel with Raj Kumar Cheney Krishnan, who is an information management officer at the UN Operations and Crisis Center, which is known as UNOCC in New York. He works closely with the UN Department of Peace Operations. He is responsible for managing the implementation of database systems that support information collection, sharing, analysis, and data visualization in UN peace operations. Raj developed the early warning rapid response app for MINUSMA. He is going to specifically talk about more detail on the application and including showing how it works. With that, I'd like to turn to Lauren to kick off the discussion today.
Hi, folks. Just sharing my screen with you. Bear with me. All right, you should be able to see our slideshow now. Yes, so as Allison said, I'm going to kick us off with some background information on peacekeeping that hopefully will make clear why early warning is so important in peacekeeping and the challenges to effective early warning that will help you better understand the innovations my colleagues will describe later. So while I imagine you're eager to get to the data and technology side of things, if you'll bear with me, hopefully this will be useful. So as a starting point, it's important to understand that not all peacekeeping missions are mandated to protect civilians, but over 95% of the UN peacekeepers currently deployed do have this specific mandate to protect civilians. And we're no longer in an era where peacekeeping missions are deployed to oversee relatively stable ceasefires between sovereign nations. Many peacekeeping missions are deployed where conflict is ongoing, where it's an internal conflict in a country, and civilians are directly targeted by armed actors. And although host nations have the responsibility to protect civilians in their countries, in practice, sometimes the only actor capable and willing to provide physical protection when an attack is imminent or ongoing is a peacekeeping mission, are peacekeepers. And so that is why early warning is so critical. And although it might be fairly obvious, I think also interesting to touch on that a UN review found that of all the factors that influence whether or not peacekeepers react to an attack, prior early warning was found to be one of the factors that has significant influence, one of the more influential factors. Things like capabilities and troop numbers were actually less significant than prior early warning in this study that was done. And when thinking about early warning and rapid response, it's also important to know that peacekeeping missions are multidimensional. So information coming in about threats and reaction to threats can and should be from a military, police, and civilian peacekeepers who are deployed on the ground together under one mission, and through these different types of tiers of action that are outlined in UN peacekeeping policy: dialogue and engagement, physical protection, and the longer term building of a protective environment. So just to touch on some of the challenges we see to early warning and rapid response, that multidimensional structure of peacekeeping missions that is such an asset to them in their mission and their activities also poses a real challenge as well. So peacekeeping missions can struggle to ensure that early warning information coming in from the many different nodes that they have, the hundreds and thousands of staff who could be reporting on any given day. They can struggle to ensure that that early warning information is verified at a central level, and that there is joint planning and coordination of responses, given how complex the staffing structure is. And this also poses a challenge to ensuring that early warning information actually feeds into a decision-making forum, and that a quick decision is taken and acted on. Troops as well come from a variety of countries, and while some are very proactive, others have a much lower risk appetite based on the priorities of the national capitals that are sending them. And unlike conventional military structures, it can be difficult to ensure accountability for a response in the field. Funding for peacekeeping has been somewhat constrained in recent years as well, and some of the troops serving in missions are don't always have access to cutting edge technology, which then affects the technology deployed to missions. It can have its limits. And there are also environmental barriers to early warning that I'm sure many of our participants are aware of who are working in similar contexts. The road infrastructure, the cell phone and internet infrastructure can be quite limited, which affects the ability to transmit early warning information and then react to it. But there has been quite an evolution in tools to address early warning and rapid response in peacekeeping missions to strengthen it. For example, missions now have specialized coordination, situational awareness, and crisis management sections called JOCs. And we've got you'll hear directly from the source on that later. But so because missions produce hundreds of reports every day, JOCs help to bring together that information into one operational picture. And before, they were actually really only sitting in capitals. But over the last few years, a lot of missions have hired JOC staff in the field to improve information sharing, situational awareness, and coordination at that field level. JMACs are the analytical specialists in missions doing threat forecasting based on information brought in directly by them and other sections. And ideally, they are working closely with protection of civilians, officers, women protection advisors, and child protection experts in a mission to produce that protection analysis. 5 years ago, most missions actually didn't have any centralized place, or many missions didn't have any centralized place where all information on violent incidents was being stored. Each section actually had something like its own Excel spreadsheet used to track data, but now thanks to the efforts of the UNOCC there and a lot of mission efforts to roll out a centralized database called SAGE, peacekeeping missions now actually do have one centralized database that can aid them in looking at data and trends. And missions still rely the most, I think, on community engagement for early warning information. And there's been a real evolution in tools for community engagement. So national staff called CLAs are now hired to engage communities. They set up things like community alert networks, local protection committees to actively participate in early warning systems. All of these are innovations developed over the last decade or so. And as well, speaking about innovations, there are now more technology in missions. So things like UAVs and other types of reconnaissance tools are increasingly deployed to missions, and policy and guidance and mandates over the last few years have increasingly focused on early warning as well. However, I think there's been a lot more progress on developing tools to improve the information collection, information sharing pieces of this picture, and there's been less work on improving the response as part of the early warning and rapid response cycles. And so, but of course, this is a cycle that is self-feeding, where response is low, information coming into an early warning cycle as well can start to drop off. So particularly important that there's effective response as well. And I think that's one reason why what MINUSMA is putting in place is so interesting, because it does tackle, some of the information sharing cycles, parts of the cycle, but also the response. And so with that, I'll turn it over to my colleagues.
Thank you, Lauren. One moment, my slide up. So, in 2019, MINUSMA began developing formal procedures for its early warning and rapid response system. This process culminated in the adoption of a new set of standard operating procedures in June 2020. And it's worth noting that this was the very first time that MINUSMA had established a formally agreed set of guidelines to handle early warnings. CIVIC recently published a policy brief that examines the reasons for the SOP and the intended outcomes of the new system. So as Lauren mentioned, early warning and rapid response systems are critical for UN peacekeeping missions to be able to effectively protect civilians. Indeed, one of the overarching reasons for the SOP was to improve MINUSMA's ability to address the deteriorating security situation in central Mali, where the conflict dynamics are very specific. The most notable aspect of conflict in central Mali is the high degree to which civilians have been explicitly targeted by armed actors. This element really increases the need for the mission to be able to intervene at short notice to try to prevent or stop attacks on villages as part of its mandate to protect civilians. To underline the point, if you look at ACLED's data for 2020, 67% of incidents involving violence against civilians in Mali occurred in the central regions of Mopti and Ségou. On the slide, you should be able to see 5 internal reasons for developing the SOP. I have listed the first 4 of them together because they are very much interlinked. So first of all, the mission decided it needed to standardize how it deals with and responds to early warnings. Before the development of the formalized system, the mission's approach was ad hoc. There was a lot of room for confusion, delays, and misunderstandings. And so the SOP standardizes the process in at least 2 ways. Firstly, it identifies who has the authority to issue an early warning. And secondly, it clarifies how information about potential threats to civilians should be shared. On the first point, the SOP makes clear that the decision-making authority is decentralized to the head of office. This is important because it recognizes that people working in field offices are more finely attuned to the local conflict dynamics in their particular region. They are the best people to take key decisions. Decentralizing this authority is also designed to speed up decision-making and reduce the potential for confusion within the mission. If the mission is relying on leaders in both headquarters and regional offices before it can take decisions, interventions can often be delayed. On the second point, the SOP specifies that threat information must immediately flow through regional joint operations centers. These RJOCs are the mission's information hubs. Before, there were occasions where sections or individuals in the field would first send the information to their superiors in Bamako without informing the RJOC. This was problematic because not informing the RJOC can delay any intervention that the mission might take, which can be especially serious when dealing with imminent threats to civilians. Another reason for the formalized procedures was to improve coordination. In this respect, the SOP emphasizes the role of RJOCs in coordinating both the mission's efforts to verify an initial alert and to respond to a confirmed threat. In fact, apart from the Department of Mission Support, RJOCs are typically the only integrated sections in MINUSMA's regional offices. They comprise elements from the police, military, civilian staff, as well as officials from the Department of Safety and Security. Therefore, they are the best placed section to gather and disseminate information throughout the mission. The fourth reason for the SOP was to encourage civilian sections of the mission to see response as their responsibility as well, and not just a task that is left to the force. Because of the extreme security dynamics in Mali, there had been a tendency to just think that response has to be done by the force because civilians can't move freely without force protection. And so to help reinforce the efficacy of the early warning rapid response system, MINUSMA defined a couple of key terms and developed true tools. CIVIC's research has shown that before the development of the SOP, there was no common understanding within the mission of the terms alert and early warning. Indeed, some people would often use the terms interchangeably, thinking that they meant the same thing, whereas others would attribute distinct meanings to the terms. And so in the SOP, the mission defines these terms. It states that an alert is an unconfirmed piece of threat information, usually just one source, and so that unverified information requires verification. The second, early warning, this typically refers, this then applies to confirmed threat, which is usually based on 3 or more, in an ideal scenario, independent sources, but sometimes there's only 2 independent sources. And this requires intervention. So the main reason why it is conceptually important to distinguish between these 2 terms is because of the different type of actions that are required. That said, in practice, the distinction between confirmed and unconfirmed threats is not always as clear-cut as it may appear on paper. The SOP also outlined 2 tools for the mission to develop to support its early warning system. One proposal was to establish a toll-free emergency hotline in each regional office to make it easier for civilians to alert MINUSMA to security threats. This hotline was piloted in Mopti last year. The second was the early warning tracking form. The form requires all sections involved in the early warning and rapid response process to record the actions that they have taken or the information that they have received in a shared form. This form is now very much at the heart of the early warning system within MINUSMA because it contributes to numerous intended outcomes. It makes it easier for the RJOCs to oversee and coordinate the processes. It is also designed to incentivize civilian sections to contribute more to the response by automatically prompting them for their inputs. And finally, the recording of time-stamped actions in a shared form should also provide more accurate data that can improve the quality of evaluations after the event. I'll finish there and I'll hand you over to Jonathan, who will talk in more detail about some of these practices and tools.
Thank you very much, Sean, and thank you very much to everybody for being here. First, I'd like to stress how this panel is structured and to what extent that makes sense for us. You have on one side the practitioner on the field, the mission that needs to have a process that makes us better at protecting civilians when there is an alert or an early warning. Then you have Raj, who's going to talk just after me, who is the person who has conceived the tool that we use. And then you have CIVIC, who is here, and I think this is why I think that this panel is so good, who was able very quickly, as we're in the early stages of the process, already to have a constructive and critical view of what we've implemented. And the fact that different entities have been able to work together to make us better at protecting the civilian population, I find it great. So, and I'm very happy to be with all of you here and to be presenting this tool today. I'll be giving a brief overview of the context, and then I'll be explaining as a second point what we wanted to achieve with the creation of what we call this early warning app or tracking form. But I think we've upgraded in a way that it's now a full app that we're using. To what extent it was successful, I want you to see how it works on not enough sometimes, and then we'll put some opening questions, hoping that you will open some debates in the chat or whatever. So for the context, and we zoomed in, Lauren presented early warning in the peacekeeping, protection of civilians in peacekeeping. Sean went into Mali, and I'll bring you all the way, if you allow me, to Mopti region, to the center of Mali. The area we are covering, the MINUSMA Mopti office is covering, is 150,000 square kilometers, which is 12% of the size of the country. This part of the country is 5.8 million people, which is 1/3 of the population of Mali. It's 175,000 of IDPs, which is more than half of the IDPs in this country. And then Sean mentioned it briefly, it's 1,306 people who were killed, all including in central Mali in 2020. This is more than 70% of the people killed in conflict in the entire country. And what do we have to fix this problem? As MINUSMA, we have in Mopti office 10% of the civilian personnel. We have 2,000 soldiers, 2,000 peacekeepers, which is almost 16% of the peacekeepers the mission has in Mali. But if I can compare the size of the region, we're covering is pretty much the size of Bangladesh. We have 2,000 peacekeepers. Bangladesh has 160,000 soldiers at hand to cover the same area. So with the needs and are so big, with people being killed, with capacities so limited, the importance of having an early indication of the threat is very important for us, and therefore this tool. But where we were before, and Sean mentioned it, we have some issues we really wanted to fix with a simple tool. This tool that Raj is going to present you in greater details had two main objectives for us. The first one is to make sure we will not always focus on a tier 2 approach to protection of civilians. And coming back to what Lauren mentioned, so the tier 2 is physical protection of civilians. The tier 1, this is everything linked to dialogue and to preventive actions, mainly being done by civilian sections of the MINUSMA, the peacekeeping mission. And so this tier 1 approach is everything that unarmed personnel, like non-weapon, can do to protect the civilian population before there's a need to put boots on the ground to physically protect the people. And too often we had the habits of something might happen. Let's see if we can send an attack helicopter. Let's see if we can send troops. But our assets are so little that we have to find other ways to do so. So that's what we've been trying to do with that. And the issue, the challenge we had is that every organization, we're not the only one, we tend to work in silos. And Sean mentioned it earlier, you tend to have sections that will report first to Bamako some information before it will come back to us in Mopti. And sometimes it was too late. So how to break the silos? So by building a tool that brings in a timely manner all the information together that allows us to break down those silos. And that's something that was key for us. So just to summarize, one, making sure we have not only the force in mind, but everything that can be done. You can phone a phone call. We have the phone numbers of all leaders of self-defense groups here. Let's call them before. We have this capacity to do things. But we need to do it in a coherent and integrated manner. So that's why the tool is helpful, and you'll see why later. So for all users, the purpose is to have a better and faster intelligence. Now because we put everything in a common system and that feeds everybody simultaneously, we have better and faster intelligence. The decision takers, they have greater capacities to take informed decisions. They have more means to take the good decision when needed. And then for the implementers, you have more accuracy about the threat. It's easier to know exactly where those people are. Finding where an attack is taking place is always a challenge. And what's happening in real time. So we're faster now, and we can adjust the decision. We can adjust where the troops are being sent. We can adjust the phone calls because we know what's going on. I wanted to take an example, but I'm afraid of being too long, so I'll skip it. And if you want to hear the example, you just put in the chat in the question and say, we want to know the example, and I come back to that later on. So what did we achieve with that? We achieved some of what we wanted. We have faster and better and more integrated information on an alert. We know better, we know faster. We have greater visibility of what everybody is doing, because all actions being taken are put in a single app. We know instantaneously who is making phone call, with what success, what did you achieve. That avoids very simple thing. If you don't have a tool that brings people together, you can have different people calling the same interlocutor and passing different messages. Or nobody calling because everybody believes someone else will be doing so. And as one of my former boss used to say, shared responsibility is no responsibility. So that we've reduced that to a great extent. Or decision takers, they've kept saying, the head of office, the commander of the force, are saying, no, I'm more able to take the good decisions because I know better what's going on. And lastly, you have more accountability. Everything is recorded. So every decision being taken by the section is recording in the system, and so we know who's done what and where. And that's very important. And then Raj will show you later how as well we measure and we have a data collection plan, and we know what actions were taken and to what outcome. We have to see and to assess ourselves if this tool achieved results. But where do we fail? Because this is not perfect. And then our decision takers, they always say it, if they are more able to take decisions now, well, that does not mean they have more means to implement them. And that's always an issue. If you see that something is happening where you do not have access and you do not have helicopters to send, and helicopters is a key issue here, you end up being able to take a decision, but you don't have the capacities to implement it. So we increased the level of frustration among our office, I must say, because we want to do things, we want to do more, but we don't have better capacities. And the second issue is that, for me personally, is that you can only trigger a certain amount of early warning a day. You cannot ring the bell 2-3 times a single day, otherwise people get tired or the tool is getting too much information at the same time, and then we have some challenges here. So also I have to take the decision to trigger an early warning, knowing that's probably the last of the day I can trigger. If I have 2 in a single day, it's already a lot. So I have to decide ahead, I'm using my chance now. So this is also a feeling that's important. Then I'd like to open questions, and I'll be using quotes I've heard in similar of those settings, and we had many conferences on Zoom over the beginning of the year. And just to trigger, I use just 3 quotes. The first one is from Denzel Washington. And he said, just because you are doing a lot does not mean you get a lot done. I like it very much, and I'm thinking about that every day. Do we get a lot done? That's the question. The second question was someone who mentioned about the European Union, but also it's very, very relevant to us here. Say, everybody agrees on what has to be done, but nobody knows how to do it. I feel very strong. I share this feeling very, very hard. And the third one, I heard this at the first panel, the opening panel of this very conference. And I forgot who said, but that early warning will remain a system that requires great care and human at the center. And I believe that that's important. And that would be my three opening questions. And Raj, I give you the floor on that.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good morning, good afternoon to all attending this workshop. Before I begin, I think one thing I want to point out from my observation while attending sessions throughout this workshop is that there have been multiple efforts to use data and technology, and also by a variety of actors, to develop and implement early warning systems. But I just like to recall what is the theme of the workshop: early warning, early action. So just as you have early warning on one side of the equation, the early action component also needs to be developed, systematized, and institutionalized. And I think that's what we have managed to do with the app that we have developed, but at least for early warnings related to security incidents or possible violent incidents against civilians, or what we call protection of civilian incidents. My office, the UN Operations and Crisis Center, UNOCC, has been supporting peacekeeping and special political missions with information management tools, primarily related to situational awareness and conflict analysis. So when MINUSMA approached us asking for a tool that can operationalize the early warning rapid response SOP, it was just another tool for us to add to the tool set that we provide to missions. So we worked on that, and we focused very much on what was the key principles outlined in the early warning rapid response SOP. So what were the key points there? The SOP required that the system be quick and decentralized, but also with full accountability and transparency on all actions taken. So those were the guiding principles that we developed the app with. There has to be transparency, accountability, so data on all responses had to be collected easily and also stored in a database so that longer term analysis could be done. But it also had to be quickly shared with all the stakeholders who had a responsibility in responding to an early warning. So we had to collect information quickly, share it with all stakeholders, and keep the information so that it could be analyzed, so that there could be accountability based on what actions have been taken. But also important was that we didn't create an app for the sake of creating an app to use technology, but also make it practical and sustainable, because when peacekeeping missions work on the ground, their situations are not as straightforward as in a normal context. Especially in MINUSMA, they have frequently rotating military and police peacekeeping staff, and also to a lesser extent rotating civilian staff as well. And when it comes to uniformed peacekeepers, they may not all be tech savvy, depending on which nationalities they come from and the training they've received. So the system had to be something that was simple, yet adaptable. So we work very closely with MINUSMA, especially Jonathan and his colleagues in MOPTI. They were very good in providing the right kind of requirements so that it made developing the app that much easier. And while the app was meant for MINUSMA, we also wanted to make sure that it was something that could be useful for other peacekeeping missions. If let's say another mission wanted a similar tool, we didn't want to start from scratch. So what we did was keep it as flexible as possible so that we could plug in the app easily into another mission's context. And that's exactly what happened. Once we've rolled it out to MINUSMA, now we have interest from MONUSCO, the peacekeeping mission in the Democratic Republic of Congo. They would also like to pilot the app to see if it will work there as well. Next slide, please. So just a few screenshots to show how the app works itself. So within MINUSMA, there are certain authorized personnel who can create an early warning record in the system. So just to emphasize, the app focuses very much on the response side of it. So as Jonathan mentioned, there is the, Sean mentioned, sorry, there is the text message phone number, and there are other ways that the mission receives early warning. As soon as an early warning is considered worthy of mission taking a look at it and responding to it, authorized personnel will create the early warning record in the system, and immediately it triggers emails to all the key stakeholders who need to respond to that early warning. So emails go out to the force or the military, to the UN police, to the security, and all civilian components and the head of office, so that they're all aware that such an early warning has been received and that they need to act on it to provide their inputs as to what is their response going to be. And as I mentioned, it kind of, because they're using, we are using the Microsoft platform, the Power Platform is used for this. It's a quick way to, it's a quick and easy way to create the tool for quick dissemination of information. And once this email goes out, for example, let's say the military received the email. Next slide, please. They would then come to the app, and there would be a kind of a questionnaire where they would fill out what was the response and what is the assessment of the early warning that they received, including things like who did they contact and what kind of actions did they take, what is the threat level to the civilian population, what is the threat level to the mission itself. All those parameters can be entered by the force. Similarly, the civilian sections can also enter what kind of mediatory actions they did on their part as well. And all that information is consolidated. And as soon as a response is entered, immediately emails go out to all the stakeholders again, informing them that such an action has taken place. Next slide, please. So the app itself is where all that information is aggregated together. So it can be easily installed on your phone or tablet. And you can just go in and scroll through all the early warnings and list out the responses and actions taken by each of the components. And it is permanently stored in this app so that we can do data visualization, like we'll see in the next slide. So all the data that is being collected is being stored in a database from which we have data visualizations that we are making. And this is just the beginning, because as more and more data is collected, we'll probably figure out different ways of trying to analyze the response, improve the response, and also see how we can measure accountability. So that in a nutshell is what this app does. And I think, yeah, that's all I have to share. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Raj, and to all of our panelists. So, as was discussed, we started with what are the challenges in the context where UN peacekeeping operations are operating, from the high rates and different types of violence against civilians to large operating areas with host state governments that are unwilling or unable to provide protection and a lack of infrastructure. Lauren talked about the unique strengths that integrated multidimensional peacekeeping operations can bring to early warning and rapid response to violence against civilians, given their wide range of capabilities, including civilian, military, and police components. But she also, talked about how those strengths can bring challenges, including communication and coordination between sometimes siloed components, and decision-making that is often centralized at a mission's headquarters, distance from the local context where warnings are received. And in order to address these challenges, the mission needed an early warning rapid response system and standard operating procedure to define roles and responsibilities. Without that, a technological solution likely wouldn't have been helpful. But Jonathan, who is the chief of the Joint Operations Center in Mopti, where the threats are really high to civilians, spoke to the need for the technological solution in order to help operationalize that SOP. And then, of course, Raj demonstrated the technical solution, which helps alert people to take action and to track response. And I want to emphasize that tracking response, because without the ability to track, it's very difficult to sort of analyze what's working, what's not working, and improve the system going forward. So we look forward to your questions and comments, and remind you to submit those in the chat box on the right side of your screen, and we already have some coming in. So for example, the comments and questions about how do you incentivize the local population to contact the mission? Are the toll-free numbers free? This question of how do you really decentralize and systematize decision-making and action across the different parts of the peacekeeping mission. We're going to start with those and hope others will add some more questions and comments. I'm going to turn first to Jonathan for comments, given he's in the mission and can really speak to how it's working. Jonathan, let's go to you first.
Thank you very much. I first answered the question on how do we incentivize people to reach us? Well, there is indeed a free toll number that's been disseminated and that allows people to call us for free. Here, there is an open question and in ongoing internal debate that I put on the table as well, and would be happy to hear from your views, because we are in a country where calling the mission to ring the alarm bell might be putting the person in danger. So there are two ways to give a number to some people. Either you have a network and you give it only to the most responsible person, like village chiefs, also because they are responsible for their communities and they can call you on behalf of other people, or you do a mass dissemination and you put that on the radio station and you broadcast and you make sure that everybody in this country knows the number, because if everybody knows the number, nobody is in danger. So two different processes, and I put that on the table, how you believe it would be best to do it. But indeed, there is a number where people can call for free and then we get it. But this is not all. We have also, and Lauren mentioned it, we have the community liaison assistant. This is a great asset. These are national staff that knows the communities very well, who have their own network among the people that can feed them. And that works pretty well, and we receive information from them. The third tool we're having to get the information from the early warning is that the reconciliation committees that we put together in support of government entity, which is ERA. So I rephrase, they put it and we supported them in putting those reconciliation committees in place. And they also have immediate access to us. And that's the way it happens. We quite often, we have rather good information, I must say. It really depends on the country, but here in Mali, it's rare to have a completely false information, and it's usually not too bad. The accuracy is usually off, and the location are usually the problem, but the fact is usually not too bad, and that depends of where you are and the context. On the question of decentralization, how do we decentralize authority and ensure consistency at the same time? Well, the answer would be trust. The head of mission here has heads of offices in all missions. They're highly qualified staff, and he can trust those people to make sure they implement what they're supposed to be. It's an easy answer, but I strongly believe that the human component on that is extremely important. That's all from me.
Thanks, Jonathan. I'm going to turn to Sean next, but then Lauren, since you've actually looked at some of these early warning rapid response and the sort of incentivization of ways in which communities contact the mission, I'm going to come to you after Sean to also respond to that and the decentralization issue. Sean, let me turn to you to talk about incentives for contacting the mission and decentralization from your perspective, having looked at the mission from the outside.
Thank you. So the last time we were in Mopti, actually, we did interview a fair number of civilians who regularly contact the mission, either through the pilot number that existed last year or through other mechanisms to alert the mission to potential threats. And what was really striking when I was speaking to those people was there isn't that much need to incentivize, because if someone's facing a serious physical threat, that's strong incentive enough to seek some actor to come to provide protection. So people really saw that there was a value in being able to provide information to the mission, particularly when they have very little faith in the capacity of the local authorities or the local forces to provide protection against armed actors. People do look to the mission to be able to provide that kind of urgent and essential protection. How to incentivize? I think the first way would be to demonstrate that there is a response. So the more that the mission can show that it can protect civilians responding to these early warnings, the more people are likely to be incentivized to continue to provide that kind of information. And what was also interesting speaking to people was how much people value feedback. So there was one instance where we spoke to someone who had reported a potential IED threat outside their village. MINUSMA sent people to check the threat. They found that it was not an IED, but the mission then continued to follow up on that incident and called back the person who provided the initial warning to say, we've checked it out, it's all fine, it's a false alarm, but thank you very much for providing the information, and we urge you to continue to provide such information, even if you're unsure. Like, it's always best to be on the side of caution and to alert us. So I think that the incentivizing is down to demonstration and that attitude of continuing to encourage even when it's a false alarm. On the question about how to ensure consistency while decentralizing authority, I think there are three things that come to mind. One is making sure that everybody within the mission has a common understanding of the mandate. Also have a common understanding of their rules of engagement. And then particularly for the civilian sections, but more broadly as well, is that that mandate is translated and communicated into a strategic vision, so that the leadership of the mission continually communicate their strategic vision, their approach, so that everybody within the mission is on the same page and understands what the mission is really striving for and how it wants to achieve these things. That said, I do think there are limits to consistency across different operational sectors. One, the reality is that in MINUSMA currently, you have vastly different capabilities in different sectors. So in some regions you have armed helicopters, in other regions you have intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance assets. And so the capabilities that the mission have in different regions vary quite significantly. So in Mopti, you don't have the ISR or the military helicopters, but in Timbuktu you have military helicopters. In Gao you have the ISR assets. So the way that the mission responds to threats is going to vary inevitably, regardless of what the mission would like to do. The other aspect is that the local conflict dynamics are often different from one region to the next. So I think it is important that there is decentralized authority so that those key decision makers can they have sufficient flexibility to be able to respond accordingly, and they're not constrained by some top-down need for consistency across regions. There is a difference to responding to armed threats in central Mali, where you have non-signatory armed groups very active, compared with, say, parts of northern Mali, where some of the most dominant actors are armed groups that are signatories to the 2015 peace accord. So I think the approach varies from region to region.
Okay, thanks, Sean. That was great. We have a lot of questions, Lauren. I'm actually going to ask you to hold your response. And I'm going to turn back to Raj and Jonathan. There are a number of questions in the comment box. Maybe you could try and address some of those around, Raj, there's one specific to you. Let's start with that. And then Jonathan, I'd love to go back to you around accountability, internet access, et cetera. Raj, go ahead and jump in there.
Thanks. Yeah, I see that there are two questions, one from Irene and from Juliet, speaking specifically about the app. So Irene is saying, yeah, thanks for loving the app. But she says, how do you get early warning messages from remote areas in Mopti with no or bad mobile phone internet connection? I think Jonathan can give, when he says, talks about the example, he can go into more details. But the thing is that this app itself doesn't collect information directly from the local population. The local population will speak to MINUSMA colleagues using the text message or phone line, and the MINUSMA staff, they would have internet access. They have the ability to use the app to enter that information. So yeah, it addresses the lack of internet connection or unstable phone connection by not giving that responsibility on entering the information into the app to the local population, but it's MINUSMA that does that. And the other question from Juliet about the what would be the weakness of the app? For example, is there a way to verify all stakeholders inform the app in a timely manner? Of course, the thing is, the app itself cannot control who decides to enter data when. But the thing is, because everyone can see who has entered what, it's kind of like a collective, how do I say this, shaming into action sometimes. It's like when multiple people have responded to an early warning and you're the only one that has not responded, you better respond. So sometimes this technology and sharing of information spurs action on others to join in terms of working together. So I think, yeah, that could be one way that it overcomes that. As for any other weakness of the app, again, maybe Jonathan can speak in terms of real life, from a real life perspective. Yeah, I think those were the two questions, related to the app. And there's another one about access to the app. This is also MINUSMA stuff, primarily like a regional jock like Jonathan, as well as colleagues in the different sections like the military, the UN police, security, civilian sections like protection of civilians, JMAC, and so on. So it's basically all the different sections that Sean talked about as being siloed. They are now being forced to work on one technology that brings them together. And that also kind of addresses another question about how do you, the very first question about how do you ensure consistency throughout the missions programs. As a technology person, sometimes it's not very obvious, but technology can force people to work consistently because there is one tool that requires everyone to put the information in one place. So that can also be one of the solutions to bring up some standardization and consistency in the way missions programs are conducted. And Keith, sorry, he had a question about, is this only related to MOPTI and GAU regions? No, it's right now in all the regions of MINUSMA. MOPTI was the piloting region, and Jonathan there and his team had put in a lot of effort to make sure it works. And we have now rolled it out to MOPTI, GAU, Timbuktu, Kidal, everywhere. So it's all over the mission.
Thanks, Raj. That's great. And we only have about a few minutes left. So Jonathan, obviously, even though the tech may be rolled out across all those places, that doesn't mean that the system is actually necessarily fully that everybody's using the system. And of course, people need training. So if you could address that. And then also there are these issues of what do you do when communities are suspicious of technology? What do you do when there are rumors, et cetera? So there are a number of other comments. I'm going to let you go ahead and complete this in 5 minutes, and then we'll wrap up. Thanks.
I'll tick all the boxes I can, but now very quickly, I'll start maybe because I have it in front of me on the question on Tenenku. In areas where you have, for example, Katiba Masina, who is suspicious about people using technology? This is a very fair question. And to what extent does it impact our analysis? Well, the first thing is I will not use the app to provide an analysis on the conflict in the region. The app is really here to provide an answer to threats. It's individual cases. It's how fast can we respond to make sure we protect civilians. And that does not help us to understand the under and the long-term dynamics in Tenenku sector, for example. That would not work. And indeed, we have some sectors where the population has lost this confidence or is in fear of using those things. They have more difficult access to us. But that's why the triggering is so simple, is any way to contact us. The phone call usually works, and I've not, since I'm here, received any information of one single person killed because we fear it, but because they called the mission. So the phone call is the best way, but any way to reach us, and then we do the technical part as Raj indicated. So I think that's important. Raj has mentioned the fact of that it's now covered all over the region, that we only have access to it as a UN, so it's secure to that extent. But most importantly, it's a simple tool. And not all our colleagues are tech savvy. And that's very important. And that was the challenge when we worked with Raj, and then we came back with our questions, and we was coming back with the tools. How can we make a complicated process an easy tool? There's a lot behind, but as a user, it's extremely simple. If you bought jeans online and then you fill out the survey to ask you how happy are you with your jeans, that's as simple as that. However, it provides detailed information on how to act. So providing something simple that's good for everybody. We have a big issue of the troop rotation with colleagues that go on and off every 6 months. They don't all have a deep culture on how using technical tools. And the fact that it's so simple to use, it's extremely important to us. I'll stop here because some colleagues might have other comments to make, and I'll come back if needed.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. I do want to say that if you're interested in the issue of rumors and how sort of, the difference that Sean was raising between an alert and a warning and how the mission is triangulating to try and confirm what has happened, I encourage you to read CIVIC's briefing that it just put out on the early warning rapid response system, which is available on our website. I do want to sort of give Lauren, if you have any comments you want to say more on some of these issues in other missions in the last couple minutes. And then I would just say on accountability, which was raised, I really want to emphasize what Raj was saying, which is when it's a transparent app and you can see each other's responses, that's important, but you can also go back and sort of analyze what's happening. And the mission is now in its mandate required to record how it's responding to things, which also gives some more transparency to the broader community on what it's doing. Lauren, comments from other missions?
Sure, I can try and do a bit of a tour de force here with the last few minutes. I think, so as there was a question on, is this free? And, as our colleagues from MINUSMA explained, this is free. In Mali, the mission is piloting a toll-free line. In other countries, the peacekeeping missions, other countries I work on, the peacekeeping missions do not have toll-free lines. They have workarounds, they're not quite as good. Someone can call one of those CLAs, those national staff members, they can call and hang up, so that it's very, it costs very little, or it's almost free. And then that national staff member will call them back. On connectivity and the gap in connectivity, I have seen some peacekeeping missions try to support telephone companies to expand their networks to high threat areas where connectivity is really critical to communities' own self-protection mechanisms, as well to their ability to link up to the peacekeeping mission and communicate responses. And so, that's one thing that's being tried, but also, communities are really adaptive, as are peacekeepers. A lack of cell phone connectivity can create delays, but people often move by foot to the nearest area where they can report, and they report, and then that gets transmitted via text or call to a peacekeeping mission who has additional internet capabilities to then act on this alert. So there are other models in place, but I think some of the high level takeaways that my colleagues are touching on, I think this app is fantastic. Alerts and responses are a virtuous cycle, correct? So the more that the response is improved, the more information sharing with peacekeeping missions is incentivized. As someone was asking about incentivization, but it is not, as Jonathan was saying, it's not a substitute for emotional intelligence or analysis, long-term analysis.
Right.
There are joint mission analysis centers in missions. There are protection advisors, child protection advisors, women protection advisors, who add that element of really analytical rigor, and missions have to prioritize among these many threats. But what this app does fill some key critical gaps, and I think it'll be great to see how it unfolds further.
Thanks so much, Lauren. I think we have a couple more minutes, but I am concerned about the time because we have reached our hour. So I just want to say, if you're interested in getting more questions answered, our email addresses can be found online, and you can contact us, and we'll try and connect you to the speakers and to get more responses. Raj, do you have any other comments you'd like on the questions that are asked? Or Jonathan, would you like to present that quick example?
Yeah, I think Jonathan can go ahead with the example.
Yes, I'll go ahead, and I think that answered the question as well on how do you verify the information. I mean, that encompasses all that. I take an example we had early January where we received a phone call, and that's usually the way it starts, of presumed radical armed elements southern of Bandiagaracia, for those who know, and I saw from the questions that several people here actually know the region quite well. So south of Bandiagaracia, north of Tomignan, that people on motorcycles and two pickups with weapons were moving toward the north, most probably because we know a bit the context, and then you need this background, probably towards Yangasagu because it was threatened over the last couple of months. So the way it works is that when I receive this information, I put it on the app, I trigger the app, and then this not yet confirmed information goes to all colleagues. I do that at 14 on the evening. At 6:14 p.m., I put that on the app, it goes out. You have 6 minutes later, GEMAC, who is doing the joint mission analysis, provide and reminds all colleagues about the analysis of the situation around. And then 6 minutes only after the first alert, everybody has a greater understanding of what happened in the past, who those people might or might not be, what could or could not be the intent. You have the analysis based on what happened in the past. 16 minutes later, you have human rights, who has a good network of contact, who confirm the information and can give us greater details about the locations. So we know exactly where they are, which we didn't know at the time we put the alert. In 16 minutes, we have more analysis, and then we have the exact location of this group. In the meantime, the force had informed Malian defense and security forces to tell them that we know that's happening. Can you also do something? You have the prime responsibility of protecting the population in Mali. Can you go to this area and react? The answer was no. Then we look at what we can do. Unfortunately, and I'm telling you, this story does not have a happy ending, but I wanted to have an example which is quite honest with you. Our only available air assets at the time, they were already flying north of the area. And then they had to be called back, to be stationed, to wait for the engines to cool down, to be refueled before being tasked again to the south, because we have only that many helicopters and they were already busy on another operation. So we had to sit for hours with information getting better and better. Civil affairs jumped in also 45 minutes later with better information, informing also the communities about this movement of radical armed elements. So we're getting better on information. It's an armed group to which we do not have contact in this case. So there is no way to mitigate, to try to negotiate, and to prevent any violence. And then finally, when we managed to get these helicopters to be able to take off, it's 2 hours after the incident. And when we arrived, when the village was burned down. No civilians were being killed because they were warned, because we could inform them. The village was empty. And that's at least a good sign of it, that there was no village with population inside, but we could not come on time. And therefore, the granaries and some houses were burned by the attackers.
Jonathan,
one at least died. I'm sorry, I was too long.
No, you're fine. We're just at the end of our time. Thank you so much for that example. I think it really shows that, technology presents huge opportunities, but if you don't have the early warning system in place, you don't have something to operationalize. And if you don't have the capabilities to respond, you can't actually do, you can't always get to there when you need to. So thank you so much, especially to Jonathan, who's on the ground operationalizing this, to Raj, who really helped develop the app, and to my colleagues at CIVIC who are looking at this from the outside, and to all of the participants who tuned in. We hope you'll go back and look at the recording and stay in in touch with us on how this unfolds. And thank you in general for any support you can give to UN Peacekeeping and their ability to better respond to early warnings. Thank you so much.